Alrighty, so I think we got about 9 minutes while they're setting up lunch. So I don't want us to stand in front, but I do want to give everyone the chance to ask the panel some questions. So with that, is there anyone who has questions? If not, I've got my own fodder. Go ahead.
I just wanted to throw out a question to the panel, and I guess to the room about this complexity stuff. What you call complexity is driven by business requirements, which is driven by product offering, which is driven by what customers want. How does going to whatever SDN is change what my customers want in a way that reduces complexity, especially given they want more and more, faster and faster, and more diverse every day?
Shelley, or whoever talked about complexity collapse.
It doesn't reduce complexity, so I guess
How does it address it, I guess, is maybe the question I'm asking.
Address complexity.
Can you just rephrase that last part? How does what address complexity?
So, you're talking...
It's the complexity police.
Yeah. Yes.
Keep it simple.
You talked about complexity a little bit, as did Russ, and it's been a theme, right? It shows up when we talk about SDN, so I have to think the two are related, right? But if the complexity is driven by business requirements, customer desires, things like that, I'm having trouble connecting the dots between new technology solving stuff that's driven by business requirements from customers. Did you see what I'm struggling with? Like, how do we think about that as network vendors and equipment vendors without telling our customers they're only allowed to ask for really simple vanilla things?
Well, go right ahead.
So the way I would see it is really, I think if I was designing a new next generation network, what I'd be doing is I'd be trying to push the complexity out of the multi-tenant network and orchestration system, then into the application tier itself. So basically by centralizing everything into an orchestration control plane, controller, not control plane, there's actually a distinction there that we can talk about later. You can now actually spin up and provision all your resources and then isolate your complexity to something that's in a much more manageable domain. And that's the way I would look at it.
Yeah, from a security perspective, I'll say that when we go into these customers and they want to look at VM to VM traffic for visibility or control or look for any kind of malicious behavior, the complexity for them is they have to redesign their entire network. With SDN, we can essentially build centralized policies that push to the network to essentially move traffic to us, let us inspect it, and then push it back in. So it actually reduces the complexity of having to reconfigure my entire network. So from that perspective, you're not necessarily getting rid of the complexity inside the network, but you're allowing applications and things like security tools to be deployed in a way that's much less complex than if you had to reconfigure the whole network.
I think another way of thinking about that is, for people who write software, it's not like, at some point along the line we said, assembly language, you can't ask for word processing because it's too hard to do in assembly language, right? Mm-hmm. What we had to do is develop, higher level languages and abstractions and tooling and continuous integration and so on and so forth, so that you could eventually build the product that people wanted. And that's just what we're starting to do in networking today, is realizing that we need to use those same principles and apply them to the kind of work that we do in the network.
And SDN might not be the only way to achieve that, right? I mean, look at the complexity of that user requirement and how you might want to present that to them and allow them to deploy that service. Maybe a simple netconf interface to the router you already have is good enough. Maybe you need some sort of control plane to look at that, but kind of try to take a bit more of a top-down approach to the service you're trying to deliver, and then in reality it's still a combination of solutions that'll kind of tackle that today. And that doesn't get rid of complexity, but maybe it makes the customer experience a little simpler.
Thanks.
Anyone else?
How'd that rock band work out for you?
I make a lot more money sitting here.
To kind of piggyback on that, and maybe a little bit about some of the things Russ said about layering and the possibility of adding more layers over time. I look at this as, again, if you have the same functionality, you've got the same basic things happening on the bottom layer. What it seems like we're doing is, seems to be human nature, which is build hierarchical systems, right? And so you actually are adding a layer of abstraction, which may appear to be simpler, but you haven't really removed any complexity from the network itself. And so I wonder if anybody has any thoughts on the fragility of the system and you know, how far can we keep abstracting things before, you know, you have some kind of potential problems in the middle there, right? So I mean, I look at like even computer systems in general. Right? So if you look at, you know, you've got your hardware, you've got your chips, somebody knows how to design the chip, and then somebody's how to put the chips together onto a board, and then somebody knows assembly code, and then you've got C, and then you've got maybe, you know, on top of that, maybe there's Perl, and then maybe there's Ruby, and then, you know, so you've built all these layers of abstraction, and so you've got this really simple programming language now, but it's actually still doing all of the complex things below it. Is there a risk there in adding these layers of abstraction to you know, give this perceived simplicity, or is that just the way things are, and is that, you know, are we good at building them that it's okay? I don't know.
So one of the reasons that approach works is that the underlying system is getting faster and faster. So abstraction, yes, it's actually, if you look at it, if you slice it, there's so many layers, but because it's so fast now, it doesn't really matter. It doesn't get in the way. That doesn't necessarily answer your question, but yes, if you apply it to networking, abstraction could work there, and could work as long as the underlying layers are fast enough, right? So I would say that's one thing. But the other thing is that even with this layering approach, we are seeing changes in the underlying infrastructure. For example, we do see switch silicon that supports OpenFlow now. That didn't happen, you know, 3 or 4 years ago. So it's not that there's no technological change in the underlying layers. It's not just hiding the complexity and not changing anything, but we are seeing these changes happen underneath, and hopefully some of the but there are advantages of layering, right? I mean, the whole computer science is based on abstraction and layering, and it works, right? So we just have to make sure that we can apply it to networking, right? And take advantage of the solutions that they've already paved the way. So just mimic it to get the same result, essentially.
Yeah, I would like to view from different perspective, which is it's not just adding layer over layer, but if you really look at it, how the information is made available. Like, you know, for example, you could say, okay, a specific protocol, because having worked on different protocols, whenever you propose a new protocol, you would say it's going to solve all of the problems what the other existing protocols couldn't solve. Exactly, I think if you apply the same analogy here, we start off with that, but eventually we will end up with that complexity because now we will be dealing with different set of problems. So the fragility absolutely will come up, and if not now, it will be in the future, but we will take it at that point of time. So.
All right. Looks like they're still going. All right, so if there are no more questions, I will start asking my own questions. So Ivan Pepleniak this morning actually had an interesting blog article in which he was positing that orchestration systems are actually a #1 good use case for SDN. So, and back in the original days of the ONF, that was like taboo to mention. So I'd like the panel to discuss the pros and cons of thinking it that way, and has the definition really evolved enough? Or has that really been the fundamental question that we're really trying to get to once you abstract away from the technology?
I could take it. I think I have put up that point because without orchestration, it is very, very difficult. The reason being, for the success of NFV, for example, orchestration is the key. You could ask different carriers, at least in my personal experience when I talk to them. Without orchestration, it is very, very difficult for them to deploy new services. And being services and infrastructure getting virtual, and without a coherent orchestration system, it's going to be a nightmare for them to operate. And in order to support that orchestration system, you need to have a standard way of having the data available to that orchestration system. So that is the fundamental key. At this point of time, it is very at infancy, I would say. And I think we are making tremendous progress in that regard, but without orchestration, and it's very, very difficult to deal with that problem.
You know, I had someone from Oracle about a month ago tell me that that they, you know, they have their own kind of SDN infrastructure, and they were deploying it worldwide. And they would give each one of these data centers a kind of a template and a design, and they would give them this thing, and they would find out that they implemented it completely different across every data center, right? And so then they kind of realized that, you know, realistically, it wasn't just things like OpenStack weren't just about making it easier for them to put things in place, but make it more a process where they could deliver solutions similarly across all these different data centers. So they really felt that, now, so I don't know if this really answers your question, but I'll say that I think that orchestration is key from the standpoint of, you know, building some kind of continuity and consistency in how you implement things like SDN.
And at the risk of devaluing the presentation I just gave, I would say that everything that I talked about, from OpenFlow to all of these vendor APIs to NetConf, these are implementation details at the end of the day, right?
Yeah.
And they are in service to a higher purpose. And if you look at the open daylight architecture today, underneath, even the southbound APIs talking from the controller to the network, it's not just OpenFlow, right? They have NetConf in there, and they're talking about even, God forbid, vendor CLI, screen scraping type APIs into the device. But who cares at the who cares at the end of the day, right? Except us geeks who actually have to make that piece of the layer work. So I don't disagree with what you said.
Okay. So then let's ask the business question, because this is where is SDN today? Every year since 2010 has been the year of SDN. If we're expanding the definition of SDN to encompass the orchestration systems, we look at all the financials, we look at the web monsters, we look at DevOps, where we have these orchestration tools. Are we already in the process of crossing the chasm or not? Have we hit the early majority beachhead, or are we still stuck in early adopters? Because there's a lot of orchestration systems out there that are doing a lot of these things.
I mean, my company is getting a ton of traction with those guys you just listed, right? Because they are the early adopters, and they're the ones that are being really, really innovative. And the reason we're talking to vArmor is because one of those guys on Wall Street said, you guys should talk, right? And so that's where we're spending a lot of our time. We're starting to get more interest. The conversations are shifting. People are understanding what SDN is now. I mean, that Gartner chart that was shown earlier, we're starting to shift away from that, and we're getting past the, here's why you need SDN, and more into the, okay, let's look at what you're doing today. Here's where we can fit, and admittedly, here's where maybe we don't fit. And so, it's progressing very, very rapidly. I'm in APAC a lot, which tends to be a very, very conservative market, and we're starting to see general enterprise adoption now from people that are not early adopters. So it's coming around. 2015 might be the year that's
I think the question is, if you take all the technologies out of SDN and look at what's really being solved, by that view, if we accept use cases such as what Ivan Peponiak suggested, that orchestration and automated control, that's really the question. So are we sailing? Because again, every web monster I've talked to has built their own system. They followed the Google model. It's a well-understood, well-defined pattern. Now it seems like we're trying to find the technologies. So are we really just looking at the problem wrong?
But I think your typical enterprise doesn't develop their own software. They want to buy it from Cisco or us or somebody like that, right? So what we're all essentially doing is taking a lot of what the web monsters have developed themselves and commercializing it. And that's where we're seeing progress. And Ivan has been drinking my Kool-Aid a little bit. I go sell it, well, and I'm paying him for a webinar in a few months, so full disclosure. But the New Us team approached this as an automation problem, and we found that delivering it with overlays and SDN concepts was the easiest way to get to that end goal, right? If I don't have to write screen scraping CLIs for every switch that's on the market, I can probably deliver automation quicker. And so SDN is a tool, certainly, to deliver a better automation model. That's how we approach it.
So now let's do the prognostication question if we're not across. Let's start with Gary and come down the line. When are we across? Give me a date.
Wait, say it again?
Let's do some prognostication. When are we actually going to be on the other side of the chasm?
Are you saying like when 50% of the people actually have implemented SDN kind of thing? Or?
No, when you've hit the early majority. Just that first little beachhead in the early majority.
Oh, I would say it's not for a couple of years. realistic.
So you're saying 2016?
2016, 2017.
Okay.
I think it completely depends on how you define SDN. I mean, arguably today, if you define SDN as all things software, we're there today.
Yeah.
If you define it as separation of control and data planes, we're years away, at least in special parts of the market.
What do you say?
Yeah, it depends.
Wait, that's the Cisco.
That's not a very good answer.
But you have to see, because there are different market segments. You can't compare the data center to the carrier network. So both go on different frequency and different timelines. So the adoption rate is going to be different, and similarly the technology is evolving in each of those different areas are going to be totally at different pace. So yeah, for example, data center is a low-hanging fruit for many reasons, because you could have a lot of greenfield deployment. So the adoption could be much higher versus going to the carrier networks, which is much slower because you have to deal with a lot of other things, not just the technological challenges, but regulatory issues as well.
So there's a lot of, just want to add on, because I'm not contradicting anything about the separation of data center, where failure is okay to an extent, and there's something called carrier grade, right? So the telcos, of course, have higher requirements. There are a number of trials and POCs going on, but in terms of what you're asking for, I don't see anything earlier than 2016, and that's the best estimate.
Okay. So you heard it here. 2016 is the associated date when we're all putting our names on getting there. No, that's for if you follow the crossing the chasm.
No, I mean the beginning of 2016 or the end.
Yeah.
We'll take the midpoint. We'll split the difference.
Well, if you take the Gardner hype cycle, right? I think that where they're putting SDN is it hyped up, and then it fell down, and now it's on the upswing again. So that's a good sign, right?
I would say so. I think we're starting to get to the point where we're actually having rational conversations and moving forward.
Yeah.
So, all righty. Organizers, is lunch ready? Okay. We'll stop getting way in front of everyone at lunch. Thank you very much. Thanks to the panel.